Hi, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I also teach in Toronto, Canada, and these days primarily online. My guest today is Anthony Kingsley, who has been teaching and training teachers in London, teaching for 35 years and training teachers for quite a while in London. He's also a trained psychotherapist, and he has his his teacher training course has graduated over 100 teachers um, since 1990. That's a pretty good record.
Yeah, that
Maybe
we've
more than that. Maybe more than Alexander.
is that right?
Possibly. Maybe.
I haven't
Anyway,
count-
Anthony.
I haven't counted my graduates,
Oh.
but yeah, it's I was working with Misha Magidov for many years since
Oh. Okay.
1989, so the numbers are
Oh.
quite
Okay.
large.
Anyway, Anthony has evolved a powerful mind-body approach to the technique. He's particularly passionate about medics, to what medics refer to as somatization, which is when the body reveals and reflects our trauma and pain. And he sees the potential of the technique not just for posture, aches, and pains, but also and crucially for emotional healing. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Good
So,
to
we're
see
going to talk today about your encounters with Miss Goldie, Margaret Goldie, and who was one of Alexander's early assistants, but who did not actually have a training course. She was kind of outside of that world. And maybe you could just say a little bit about how you found out about her, because that wasn't the easiest thing in the world, at least when I was in England in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I trained, as you know, I trained as an Alexander teacher in Israel from
Uh,
1982 to 1986,
right.
and actually I heard about her then.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
well, I heard more about her then. I knew about her even before I went to Israel to train, but I never had an opportunity of going to see her. But in Israel, she wasn't such a big secret. People uh, occasionally went to see her, but there was no big deal. She wasn't dissing any Alexander training courses in Israel. Uh,
Uh-huh.
in England, it was a different matter. I was working as an assistant to Misha Magidov from 1989,
Hmm.
and yeah, she wasn't the flavor of the month for the training course,
No.
and
Or for any of the training courses.
yeah, I don't think she was too popular because her attitude to most of the trainings, certainly the attitude that she told me about was she thought there weren't any good training courses in England at the time. I mean, she was fiercely loyal to Alexander, uh,
Yes.
fiercely loyal, and I don't think she felt that anything after Alexander's training course finished was up to scratch. It was a
Hmm.
deviation from the real Alexander technique. It wasn't the real deal,
Right.
and she wouldn't endorse anything. And whichever course you mentioned, it just wasn't good enough. It was wrong. It was too much emphasis on directions, not enough on inhibition, and yeah, she had quite a lot to say about other training courses.
Yeah. She's actually quoted as saying they should all shut down except maybe for one, and that one could be devoted to the real deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
But you had quite a few lessons with her,
Oh yeah,
right?
I enjoyed it. Yes.
And what's your take on her approach? What was your reaction to it?
Well, I'm a bit of a maverick myself, and I loved the idea that she was outside the conventional Alexander world.
Hmm.
I really
Hmm.
like that, and especially that she was a bit of a secret, one of the kept secrets in the Alexander community in London. That training courses didn't exactly endorse her, so that made her even more attractive as a proposition
Right. Right.
to go and visit. So I did go and visit. I went to see her, and she had a real different take to most of the other teachers who I came across and worked with. Uh, worked a lot with Patrick MacDonald. I went to the Carrington course a few times and had some experience under Walter's hands. And then, of course, I worked with the Barlows for many, many years at the Alexander Institute
Mhm.
when they asked me to be one of their teachers in 1986, 87.
Mhm.
So there were, the traditional Alexander training courses, the traditional
Right.
Alexander teachers, first generation teachers. And she was like a breath of fresh air. By the way, I have to say I have an enormous, enormous respect for those teachers I just mentioned, who I learned a huge amount from. And I mean that, huge amount.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
what was wonderful about going to Miss Goldie was that she didn't have any time for anything apart from Alexander. And so I used to go there for stories and for her hands and
Mhm.
for her a rather critical approach to the whole of the Alexander world. So she would put hands on me, and she wouldn't give me the formulaic directions. She wouldn't even ask me to repeat them. She would essentially give me the experience of non-doing, of inhibition through her touch. And that was a great experience. I remember I would just stand there in front of the chair, looking out of the window, and she'd just start to work. And she'd say, "Now, not your thing, young man, not your thing." And she'd say, "Now, you remain quiet throughout, but more alert than ever before." And she would repeat that sentence to me over and over again: "Remain quiet throughout, but more alert than ever before." Now, if you think about it, that's absolutely brilliant. She wasn't saying,
Like a cat waiting for a mouse.
"Yeah, a meerkat," or whatever. Yes,
Yeah.
the readiness and
Yep.
the poise. It
Mhm.
was she was highly intelligent. She really understood the technique. And she wasn't just saying quiet, 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 where you almost go to sleep.
Mhm.
She wasn't saying directed, up, alive, just let's just be alert, hyper vigilant. She was saying there's a wonderful combination of both quiet and alertness. And that was the message that she got across with her hands and her being.
Well, I'm surprised that she didn't, at some point early on, tell you you were no good as a teacher or something along those lines.
Oh, she did.
Oh, she
Oh,
did. Okay,
oh
good.
yes,
Because that's,
yeah. I used to go there. I used to go there, wait in the waiting room, wait outside the door. Invariably, some young student or teacher would come out in tears,
yeah,
or I'd hear the shouts in the room, and
yeah,
they'd come out devastated or upset and whatever. And I'd go in there. Oh, she'd give me a rough time, an
yeah.
absolutely rough time, because I came from a training course, and she said she much prefers to work with people that haven't been to training courses, just
Right,
pupils.
right.
Uh,
So did she not expect you to do some work on your own?
on my own, you mean on myself?
Yeah, while you were taking lessons with her,
No,
conveying this new,
I was a teacher on Misha Magida's course at the time, and I would occasionally get into a bit of trouble because I quite liked the idea of inhibition, and I wasn't overly keen on giving formulaic directions at the time, and I got into a bit of trouble with some of the with Misha and some of the other teachers who
Mhm.
weren't overly keen on this approach. And I remember going to Miss Goldie one day, and I was quite upset about the reception that some of my ideas of inhibition were receiving. And she said, "Don't you worry, young man. You just do your thing, but try and stay out of trouble." And she basically wanted me to just carry on doing whatever I was doing at the school, but not make a big song and dance about it. In other words, not to ruffle anyone's feathers, just do the work. And I
Mhm.
thought that was quite good advice, actually.
And do you think her attitude, did she really believe that the training courses should all be pretty much closed down and a new one or one remaining to teach her method? Or was that just, who knows? Was that
My
something?
sense was, I don't think she thought we were all terrible. No, I think in her kinder moments, she had time for other Alexander teachers other than herself and other than Alexander. But in terms of the the training course that she experienced with Alexander, the pure training that she got from him, I don't think she felt that any of us could match it. And so we were always going to fall short of what her ideals were: the importance of inhibition, the importance of non-doing. And she would diss us. She'd just basically say that none of the courses are doing what Alexander would say. And she said, and if he came down today, he'd be rolling in his grave. So she wasn't happy. But I think that was more her loyalty than her real idea, her real impression that we were all doing terrible work. I don't believe that she thought we were all terrible.
Did she actually attend the first training course, or is it just her work with Alexander before he started teaching in a formal way, training out teaching teachers in a formal way? Was it that, or was she actually on his first training course?
I think she was around in the early 30s. She was working with him. I think she was doing some admin work with him. I'm not 100% sure of the dates. I'm not a great historian, but she was certainly around that, all of that early generation of teachers who she knew very, very well. The exact amount of training that she did and the years that she must have spent with him, formally and informally, I really don't know.
Because that's something that very few people had, all of that personal contact with Alexander.
Yes.
For over a period of many years. So the skill that she with this process, what she conveyed to you using her hands, is that you were then to some extent able to convey that same thing using your hands, or did you use verbal instructions as well?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. First of all, I don't believe anyone is anybody else. So MacDonald is MacDonald, Carrington's Carrington, Barlow's Barlow, and Barstow's Barstow, and Miss Goldie's Miss Goldie, and Anthony's Anthony, and Robert is Robert. And the idea that I can do Miss Goldie is bonkers, any more than Miss Goldie can do Alexander. That's bonkers. But she helped me refine and deepen my understanding of the importance of getting out of my own way, of being able to stop reacting or prevent overreacting. For me, that was the core. So I was interested in exploring inhibition for me, not so I could do her stuff, but so I could do my stuff better. That for me is important. I can't do Goldie style any more than MacDonald style or Carrington style. All this myth stuff about styles is a big nonsense. Anthony can only do Anthony. So I've all the teachers who I've come across have helped me be a bit more Anthony, rather than pale imitations of all these different and wonderful teachers. So from Miss Goldie, I got an incredible sense and experience of stillness and quietness in the moment of reaction. So she'd have her hands on me. Often she'd sort of squeeze me gently at the back of my neck. And she was a frail old lady when I was seeing her. And I thought, goodness, you're not going to get me out of a chair. And I was so tempted to help her. So I give her a little bit of some help the way out of a chair. And she'd say, young man, you don't need to help me. Thank you very much. But what the wonderful thing was, when she quietened me down, when I was sitting, she'd rearrange me and quieten me and move my shoulders and my neck and my back and move me forwards and backwards. And then when she got me to a still enough point, when she felt that I was quiet enough for her to offer me a stimulus called time to get up, she would swing me out of a chair. And if I got out of the way, her swing would get me out of the chair. I'd take my heels into the ground and I'd stand up without interference. If I tried to help her, then it was a disaster. If I reacted and wanted to get myself out of a chair without her hands, it was a disaster. And I learned if I could get myself out of my own way, progressively from her touch, it all went rather smoothly. But here's the difference. She was a swinger. you know, modern rockers and swingers. And that was a style. She had incredible amount of stillness and inhibition, but she didn't just go, take me up. She swung me, but she had enough stillness to sustain the stillness through the swing until
So,
I stood.
so by swinger, would that be, would you, for example, consider McDonald to have been a swinger in that
So
sense?
McDonald was a boxer, so he had this amazing ability to sort of to lunge himself here and then up and here and then up. So he was able to hold himself at the critical moment and heels or stand.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't use momentum. In fact, he was very against momentum. He wanted the skill of non-use of momentum. He was much happier with forwards, backwards, or whatever he was doing. And then at the critical moment, could he stop? In the swing, by definition, you can't stop halfway because you're in the middle of momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So she was good at momentum, I have to say. She was excellent at it because she had so much incredible stillness that she was able to sustain the inhibition through the action of movement. McDonald had this incredible skill to move you forwards or backwards and then stop. And then when he felt everything was ready, lift and lift.
Okay, right.
And so there was a difference in style. Again, not right or wrong, different
Right.
capacities, different abilities. But certainly not Alexander, non-Alexander, or one has to be with momentum or without momentum. That was, again, a personal idiosyncrasy. I quite like,
yeah.
I quite like exploring different ways of doing movement.
So let me ask you about another teacher. I mean, as you know, I've done the series of interviews with Penelope Easton about her experience with Miss Goldie. And she also stressed this ability of Miss Goldie to get her into this state of the kind you're talking about. And I was thinking about that a lot when I, was processing the videos and putting them up. And I wonder if in some odd way, Walter Carrington internalized a little bit of that idea, because when I think about his training course, which I did not attend myself, but I attended an offshoot of it, he created a kind of an atmosphere of calm in himself and in the whole teaching situation. He had that gift. I think it had its downside in some ways, but he clearly was interested in people becoming less excited, let's say, when he did work with them.
Yes.
Do you see any connection there at all from what
I do actually. And certainly the experience I had with Walter was that he exuded this amazing calmness.
Mr. Serene. I mean,
Mr.
he was
Serene
just
and Mr. Kind.
Mr. Kind. Yes, he was a very kind man.
And Mr. Non-flappable.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that did pervade the training course very much so.
Yeah.
McDonald, on the other hand, was a fiery guy.
Yes, he was.
He was a boxer, and he was fiery, and he was passionate, and he was excitable, and at the same time, he had this incredible stillness that came through his hands, very, very non-doing hands, lazy wrists, he would talk about. But he was able to be quite mobile, agile, with monkeys and lunges and ups and downs and movements, but still maintain his incredible stillness. Carrington, on the other hand, had this background quality of peacefulness. He didn't want to fight anybody. He wasn't that sort of personality. And that did pervade the room, certainly. But you probably know that mechanically, Carrington had problems with his hips from the
Oh
war.
yeah, sure.
And
Yeah.
he would walk into the room and he'd have his walking sticks and he'd stand by the chair.
Right. Well, he
And
didn't have the six when I knew him, but I can imagine he had
later on, yes,
injured at least one hip very badly during the war
that's
in a
right. So
plane
exactly right,
crash.
in a
Yeah.
plane crash. And so before the sticks or after the sticks, later on, of course, with sticks, he would just wait there and he'd stand. He'd have his lovely monkey position,
Hmm.
and he'd work. But he
Right.
wouldn't be able to lift up a leg and then do a lunge or
Right.
dance around the pupil, going from side to side and
Right.
adopting different postural shapes.
Hmm.
If you think about McDonald, the boxer, he could do all of those things. So he
Right.
was limited in movement. And so his style, if you want to call it that, was much more positional.
Hmm.
He'd move the shoulder, the neck, the back, the shoulders, the neck, the back, the arms, the legs. He'd be in that position. And he'd then get you out of a chair when he felt that you were steady and ready
Hmm.
and still enough and quiet enough. McDonald didn't do too much preparation at all. He stuck his hands on you, up you were, up onto
By
your
the
feet.
way, McDonald, I guess in some odd way, agreed with Miss Goldie that the training courses at that time, this is like around 1980, they were all terrible. Because I asked him, when I came over to England the first time and had lessons with different people, and I said to him, "Well, what do you think's the best training course?" And he said, "None of them are any good," and I include my own. And then he said two things. He said, "But I think mine's the best of a bad lot." And then secondly, and this was just as all his students were coming in kind of outside his office. Actually, I'd like to get rid of half my students. They're no good. And he said it quite loudly so they could obviously hear it. So that was, I mean, that was his personality and
That was his
his.
personality, that's right. And he had a lot of tongue-in-cheek comments like that. He said to us also, he said, I'll be lucky if 1 out of 10 of my students come out halfway good from my training course.
Yeah, yeah.
And he'd say that all the time, those sorts of
Yeah,
depreciating
yeah.
comments. And
How about Marjorie Barlow, which I've never had any lessons with her. Do you think you see any connections between her work and Miss Goldie or Miss Goldie's ideas?
I think there's something called charisma of age. And I think I was privileged to work with all of these people when they were older. And I suppose I respected them so much also because they were the first generation of teachers.
Hmm.
And so they all shared this charisma of people that worked with Alexander and were experienced. Uh,
Yeah.
who was she like? Well, apparently, according to the history records, in the third year of Alexander's training course, or at the end of the third year, they were supposed to qualify. And the students said to Alexander after the 3 years, look, we're not ready.
Yeah.
He
All
said,
except for Marjorie Barstow.
well, that's right. Who went back? Who went
Went
back up?
back, but then
Yeah,
kind of apprentice was the assistant of Alexander's brother for several years
that's right. That's
in
right.
the States.
So those that stayed in England said, look, we're not ready. And he said, well, do an extra year. And they got into little huddles, little groups.
Right. I've heard
And
about that.
Marjorie Barlow got together with Patrick MacDonald, and they sort of tried to work things out their way. And according to some records, Patrick was trying to understand how Alexander was working, and said, "Look, this is what we think he's trying to do, but he can't really explain it to us. We have to work it out ourselves." So they
Hmm.
each tried to understand Alexander based on that fourth year of training, and developed their own understanding
Hmm.
and their own styles, and they're all different and the same. So they had different ways of talking about the directions. When people say, Anthony, do I stick to the classical directions? I say, well, which ones? Neck free, head forwards and up. Well, or Miss Goldie used to say, not head back, not head back, not your thing, young man, not head back.
Hmm.
Dr. Barlow would say, neck free, neck long, head forwards, head up.
Yeah.
Neck free, neck long, head forwards, head up. What he changed them. Um, MacDonald would say up, up along the
Mm-hmm.
spine,
Yeah.
up, up. So which one's right? Well, none of them are right, and
Yeah.
none of them
So, by the way, Marjorie Barstow would say, move your head delicately away from your torso in such a way that your
are such a way
torso
that,
comes
yeah.
along.
So that was early Alexander when he said, and in fact, if you look at Alexander's use of the self,
Mm-hmm.
he started off, put the head forwards and up, gently move it forwards and up.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
later on, it was let the neck be free to
Yeah.
let the head go
Yeah.
forwards
Yeah.
and up.
Yeah.
All of these evolutions. And as I write in my introduction to use of the self, I'm plugging the book
Go for
now,
it.
that things evolved and would have carried on evolving. And they
Mm-hmm.
have carried on evolving. And if Alexander was around, who knows what he'd be doing. But what is important, and I'll say this to you now, in 1946, I don't know if I've got the book here. I do have the book here. This is a book called A Time to Remember by Walter Carrington.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In 1946, very, very interesting. November the 4th, Monday, at tea time, of course, us Brits have
Yeah,
tea time.
no, I know. Sacred. Yeah.
Very sacred. You have Starbucks, we have tea time.
Yeah.
At tea time, FM said that at last he decided that we must cut out in future teaching all instructions to order the neck to relax or to be free, because such orders only lead to other forms of doing.
Mm-hmm.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
Again, cut out your formulaic directions of let the neck be free or let the neck relax to let the head go forwards and up. Why? Because it leads to other forms of doing.
Yeah, and I could tell you exactly why it leads to other forms of doing, because it makes an assumption that you know how to let it. And very few people are able to do that. And that's why I think those directions, I use directions a lot in my teaching, but I don't use those because they are deeply flawed, in my opinion. They make an assumption that's just not true.
Yeah.
But there are directions available now which bypass that very nicely. Anyway, that's a little aside. So just a final question. Given that Miss Goldie, as she was known, was kind of a secret, not that many people are around today who had any experience with her, including myself. Is there any kind of a takeaway that we can get from what you learned from her that might be something that teachers and students today could experiment with? You have a little self-help exercise you could share.
I think rather than a self-help exercise, which may not be the most helpful, more a reflective appreciation that when you are in a state of non-reaction, when you find yourself not reacting to a stimulus, at that point your neck is free and you're in a good condition. And I think that's really the point, that Miss Goldie's hands conveyed such a capacity for stopping reacting, for the prevention of reaction, that all the rest sorted itself out. And as she said to me, she said, and she's quoting Alexander, "By Jove, I've got it. It's crystal clear. If you stop doing the wrong, the right will do itself." And she really meant that. She really meant it. And she gave us the experience of it. She gave us the experience that when the reactive self stops its usual drama, the right thing, the right condition, the directions, the flow, the high level of functioning happens of its own accord without any extra help on its way from mentally rehearsing directions. The directions are the result of an experience rather than the means to achieve it.
The directions that were available at that time.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. And when Miss Goldie, bless her, when she was in a bit of a rant about other training courses, and we have to be honest about these things, she wasn't at her best. When she had her hands around my neck and I asked her a question about a particular training course, and she'd get upset about it, and her hands weren't conveying stop. They were conveying irritation and frustration and rubbish. And when I learned not to provoke her with my idiotic questions, I got a much better experience of stopping my own reactive self. And then the beauty came through. And I suppose the message from Miss Goldie is that we need to all develop an ability within ourselves to prevent our own reactive behaviors, our own reactive patterns to stimuli, and then communicate that through a touch. And as you also, I'm sure, know, I think it's communicated without touch as well.
Yeah, well, that's
So
what Zoom's all about
that's
for
what Zoom's
sure.
all about. And I've had a very interesting experience this last year of conveying the essence of non-doing, of inhibition, of stillness, of non-reaction
Mhm.
through voice and gesture and Zoom communication. And so, yes, maybe you could say you can get it very immediately through the touch, but I wouldn't underestimate the capacity. If the teacher's working at this ability for non-reaction that is communicatable through being and not simply through touch, although maybe you could argue that the gold standard might be touch, but that's a much bigger question. We'll have to have a separate
It's a much
talk on.
bigger question. Yeah.
Much bigger question. Yes.
Well, I think this might be a good place to end our conversation about Miss Goldie, unless you have something
No,
further
I
to
think those
add.
things I just she said one or two things that maybe I just leave behind for you to think about.
Yeah.
All of that she said it's creating new pathways in the brain. This
Hmm.
Alexander with she said it's a voyage of discovery and it
Hmm.
creates new pathways in the brain. And again, that matches with our present understanding of neuroplasticity, that
Yep.
we are literally creating new pathways in the brain
Yeah.
with the prevention of habit. And this idea of a voyage of discovery, that we are discovering something about being human. And I think those are takeaway messages from Miss Goldie that I think are really valuable.
All right. Well, let's end on that note. My guest today has been Anthony Kingsley, a teacher and teacher trainer in London. I'll put a link to his website by the video, and also this will be a podcast later by the podcast. Um, Anthony, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me. Good to see you.
Good to
Bye.
see you.